Richard Hale stopped at the entrance to the Crown Emergency Services Fire Station 51. Not from fear, from habit. 20 years in the Royal Marines had trained him to recognize moments that divided a life into before and after. Crossing a threshold mattered. It meant the rules changed, the people changed. Sometimes the mission changed too. Above the reinforced entrance, brushed steel lettering reflected the pale grey light of Kingsport's polluted dawn. Crown Emergency Services Fire Rescue Station, 51 Vita Anti-Omnia. Life before everything. Hale studied the words quietly. In the Marines, he muttered, the mission comes first. Then he stepped inside. The doors sealed behind him with a soft, hydraulic whisper. Outside vanished instantly. The distant fires, the haze hanging over Kingsport, the constant tension of a city struggling to hold itself together. Inside was precision. Station 51 did not resemble the firehouses from old historical vids. There were no polished brass poles or noisy recreation rooms. This place felt military. Layered security doors separated operational sectors. Medical triage stations operated with silent efficiency behind transparent, smart glass partitions. Overhead lighting adjusted dynamically as personnel moved through corridors. Everything had purpose, everything had order, and somewhere beneath the station, machines waited. Hale followed the illuminated path deeper into the structure until the corridor widened into the main apparatus bay. He stopped cold. Even after years operating armoured combat platforms in war zones, the sight hit him harder than expected. The bay stretched like an industrial cathedral beneath towering gantries and suspended maintenance rails. White lighting reflected off steel, composite armour, and drifting holographic diagnostics. Heavy rescue rigs sat in charging cradles while autonomous drones moved silently overhead. Nothing here felt passive. Everything looked ready. "Hell," Hale breathed. A calm voice answered immediately. "Good morning, Firefighter Hale. Orientation sequence initiated." Hale's eyes narrowed slightly. No speakers, no visible source. "Master AI?" he asked. "Affirmative. Station intelligence designation, Atlas 51. The lighting overhead shifted almost imperceptibly. "Welcome to Station 51. Hale exhaled slowly. So the rumors were true. Atlas 51 was not a machine hidden in a room somewhere. It was the station itself. The AI existed through thousands of distributed systems, woven into the walls, rails, vehicles, drones, and operational infrastructure of Station 51. It monitored everything constantly: structural loads, medical telemetry, crew vitals, weather patterns, fire behavior, always calculating, always present. "I'm not your superior, Firefighter Hale," Atlas said evenly. Hale folded his arms. "That's a good start." A brief pause. "Acknowledged." Bootsteps echoed across the bay. The shift crew approached together with the quiet confidence of people who trusted each other completely. Captain Aaron Rourke led them. Late 40s, broad-shouldered, controlled. The kind of officer who never needed to raise his voice because the room already belonged to him. Rourke stopped in front of Hale and offered a hand. "Welcome to 51. The handshake was firm and direct. "You survived the Royal Marines," Rourke added with faint amusement. "Now let's see if you survive us." Hale met the grin evenly. "We'll see who breaks first, Captain." Rourke actually laughed at that. Behind him stood Lieutenant Jace Torrin, head drone operator for Station 51. Unlike Rourke, Torrin studied Hale carefully before speaking. Sharp eyes, analytical posture, calm intensity. "Drone operations and command integration," Torrin said. "Lieutenant Jace Torrin." "I know who you are," he added after a moment. Hale nodded once. "Then let's figure out why I'm here." Torrin finally extended his hand. Chief Engineer Jose Alvarez arrived next, carrying a datapad under one arm, while grease stained both sleeves of his engineering jacket. "Alvarez," he said with a grin, "I keep the machines from killing everybody." "Comforting," Hale replied. Alvarez shrugged. "I said I'd try." The final member of the team stepped forward quietly. Paramedic lead Sarah Okoye. Her calm presence cut through the harder military tones surrounding the others. "This isn't combat," she said after introducing herself. Hale met her eyes. "But people still bleed." The words landed harder than expected. No bravado, no speeches, just truth. "I'll remember that," Hale answered. Rourke turned and motioned deeper into the bay. "Come on," he said. "You've seen the station." Now it was time to see what made Station 51 famous. They passed the primary apparatus first. Heavy 51 sat nearest the deployment ramp, a massive command and response engine equipped with autonomous stabilization systems, AI-regulated hose pressure management, and 16 dedicated support drones integrated into its command network. Farther down stood Ladder 51, its magnetic rail extension system folded tightly against the vehicle's frame. "Can anchor directly into glass and steel," Rourke explained. "High-rise extraction platform." "Used it last week during a tower collapse," Alvarez added casually. "And?" "We didn't fall." Rescue 51 occupied the next base section. Medical drones rested in charging racks beside compact rescue vehicles and surgical support systems. "Triage drones deploy ahead of crews," Okoye explained. "Scan victims, prioritize survivability." Hale glanced toward the dormant drones. "Meaning the AI decides who gets treatment first?" Okoye shook her head once. "No," she said quietly. "It decides who still can." Silence settled briefly after that. Then Hale noticed something deeper in the bay, something larger. Rourke saw the look immediately. "Now," the captain said, "we get to the reason you transferred here." The EF-72 fireframes stood suspended inside massive support cradles, two towering exomechs, 6.5 meters tall. Their armored hulls carried burn scars and repair scoring from previous deployments. Hydraulic restraints held them in place while diagnostic systems flickered across their frames like nervous system activity. They did not look like machines. They looked alive. "The new EF-72 rigs," Rourke said. Hale stepped closer instinctively. "Structural fires, collapse zones, heavy rescue." A low mechanical vibration rolled through the deck as one of the giants adjusted slightly in its harness. "Systems active. Watching." "Thermal-resistant composite armor," Hale observed. Alvarez nodded. "Rated for temperatures hot enough to liquefy conventional rigs." Rourke pointed towards the shoulder assemblies. "Integrated foam and water cannons, precision manipulators. They can cut open a collapsed structure or lift an entire transit car." "And the AI?" Hale asked. That question slowed everyone slightly. "Autonomous Assistance Core," Alvarez answered carefully. "Emotional dampening systems included." Hale looked back toward the machine. "Meaning?" Alvarez folded his arms. "They don't panic." Above them, one of the fireframes released a low hydraulic exhale, almost like breathing. "They compensate." Rourke's expression hardened slightly. "And if you're in the pilot seat," he said, "you learn to do the same." The mech's optics flickered alive, dim red, steady, aware. For the first time since arriving at Station 51, Richard Hale felt something close to unease. Not fear, recognition. Because he understood immediately what those machines represented. This was not firefighting anymore. This was war against disaster itself. And Station 51 stood on the front line. Rain hammered against the armoured hull of Engine 51 as it rolled through the neon-lit streets of Kingsport. Steam hissed from the wheel wells while emergency strobes painted the wet pavement red and blue. The massive vehicle looked more military than civilian, six-wheeled and plated in ceramic armour, thick enough to stop rifle rounds. Inside the cab, the crew sat in exhausted silence. Their first major call together had nearly killed 3 refinery workers and levelled an entire industrial block. Richard Hale still smelled burning chemicals inside the filters of his turnout mask. Captain Aaron Rourke sat up front, reviewing incident footage through his retinal display, while Atlas 51 quietly processed reports through the truck's integrated systems. Structural collapse probability exceeded projections by 31%, Atlas stated calmly through the cabin speakers. Civilian survival rate improved due to Lieutenant Hale's rapid intervention. Richard leaned back against the reinforced seat. "Tell the report I got lucky." "Statement inaccurate," Atlas replied. A few chuckles rolled through the cabin. Across from him, firefighter Luis Ortega shook his head. "You dragged 2 people through a wall of fire while carrying a thermal lance. That wasn't luck." "Marine reflexes," another firefighter muttered. Richard didn't answer. He stared out the armoured side window at the rain. The city lights blurred together into streaks of gold and crimson. He had spent most of his adult life inside combat dropships, armoured personnel carriers, and exoframe deployment racks. He knew how to advance through gunfire. He knew how to kill. Saving people still felt unfamiliar. The truck descended into the underground vehicle lift beneath Station 51. Massive blast doors opened ahead of them. The mech bay waited below. The cavernous chamber glowed with industrial floodlights and holographic maintenance displays. Towering exoframes stood in magnetic suspension cradles while drones buzzed overhead carrying tools and replacement armor plates. Hydraulic arms rotated slowly from the ceiling like the limbs of some enormous mechanical spider. Richard stepped from the engine beside the others, pulling off his gloves. That was when he heard Jim Marshall yell from across the bay, "Marine!" Richard sighed quietly. Jim marched toward him, holding a data slate and grease-stained diagnostic gloves. Station 51's senior exoframe technician looked perpetually irritated at the universe. "You survived your first run." "Barely." "Good." Jim shoved the slate into Richard's chest. "That means the machine survived too." Richard glanced down at the display. "Training exercise. Live system calibration." He looked back up. "You serious? Your handling metrics are abnormal." "That sounds bad. It means you're either gifted or dangerous. I haven't decided which." Several firefighters nearby grinned. Jim pointed toward the far end of the bay. Richard's exoframe stood waiting. The machine was enormous up close. Nearly 11 feet tall in standby mode, the exoframe fire suppression rig resembled a fusion of industrial loader and military assault platform. Heavy white and red armor plating covered the torso while hydraulic bundles ran along reinforced limbs like exposed muscle. The Crown Emergency Services crest gleamed across the chest. Richard approached slowly. The machine woke as he neared. Blue optic sensors flickered alive. "Pilot recognized," the onboard AI announced. "Lieutenant Richard Hale authorization confirmed." The chest assembly unfolded open with a hiss of pressure seals. Richard climbed inside. The cockpit wrapped around him like a second skeleton. Neural sync lines attached along his forearms and spine, while the frame's control harness locked into place. Instantly the machine moved with him. Not delayed, not mechanical, natural. Jim's voice echoed through external speakers. "Today's exercise is simple. We test attachments, movement precision, rescue operations, and heat resistance." Richard flexed the rig's massive fingers. Servo motors purred smoothly. "Simple," he muttered. The bay floor shifted. Training barriers rose from hidden compartments while holographic flames erupted across simulated corridors. A drone projected collapsing debris patterns overhead. Atlas 51's voice joined the simulation. "Scenario loaded. Industrial transit tunnel collapse with trapped civilians." Richard rolled his shoulders. The mech responded perfectly. Then he moved. The entire crew went quiet. Most firefighters piloted exoframes carefully, almost cautiously. The machines were heavy and expensive. Richard moved like the frame weighed nothing. The exoframe sprinted across the bay with shocking speed. Hydraulics thundered. The massive machine vaulted over fallen debris and landed in a controlled kneel beside a simulated casualty marker. Jim blinked at his monitor. "Okay," he muttered. Richard activated the frame's rescue arms. Smaller articulated manipulators unfolded beneath the primary gauntlets, designed for delicate extraction work. The massive combat-capable hands suddenly operated with surgical precision. The rig lifted crushed steel beams without disturbing the victim marker beneath. "Pressure balance stable," Atlas reported. Richard pivoted smoothly and deployed the thermal suppression cannon mounted over the shoulder. A stream of blue-white suppressant foam blasted across the burning corridor simulation. Steam exploded through the bay. Several rookies stared openly now. "Hell," Ortega whispered. "He runs it like combat armor." Because it was combat armor once. Richard saw it immediately. Different shell, different colors, same bones underneath. Richard activated the frame's rescue arms. Smaller articulated manipulators unfolded beneath the primary gauntlets, designed for delicate extraction work. The massive combat-capable hands suddenly operated with surgical precision. The rig lifted crushed steel beams without disturbing the victim marker beneath. "Pressure balance stable," Atlas reported. Richard pivoted smoothly and deployed the thermal suppression cannon mounted over the shoulder. A stream of blue-white suppressant foam blasted across the burning corridor simulation. Steam exploded through the bay. Several rookies stared openly now. "Hell," Ortega whispered. "He runs it like combat armor." Because it was combat armor once. Richard saw it immediately. Different shell, different colors, same bones underneath. Quiz, Kexegs. The Crown Emergency Services rigs were descendants of military exoframes. The Empire pretended otherwise for public relations, but veterans always recognized the truth. These machines were built first for war, Now they saved lives. Jim activated the next phase. Warning sirens erupted. Multiple structural failures detected. Heavy steel slabs crashed down around Richard. Without hesitation, he triggered the rig's stabilization anchors. Massive spikes fired from the frame's legs into the deck plating. The Atlas rig caught an entire collapsing wall section with both arms. Hydraulics screamed. The mech bay floor groaned beneath the weight. Richard gritted his teeth inside the cockpit as warning lights flashed red across the HUD. Load limit exceeded. He adjusted stance automatically. Military instinct, distribute weight, control breathing, maintain centerline. The wall stabilized. Everyone in the bay stared. Even Jim looked impressed now. "Atlas," Richard said calmly. "Run auxiliary power through left hip actuators." Confirmed. The frame compensated instantly. Richard rotated the wall section aside with careful precision and lowered it safely to the ground. Silence. Then slow applause started somewhere behind the observation railing. More joined in. Jim crossed his arms. "I hate natural talent." Richard climbed from the cockpit as the chest assembly opened again. Sweat soaked through the underlayer beneath his turnout gear. Jim stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've done this before. Not this exact model. That's not what I meant." Richard looked towards the towering rig. Its optic sensors still glowed softly in standby. Finally, he answered. "In the Marines, we used siege frames during urban pacification operations." The bay quieted slightly at the word pacification. Everyone knew what that meant. The Royal Marines ended wars, brutally. "You ever kill someone in one?" a rookie asked before immediately regretting it. Richard looked at him, not angry, just tired. "Yes." Nobody spoke. Rain hammered faintly against the distant upper levels of the station. Then Captain Vance stepped forward. "And now he uses those skills to pull civilians from burning buildings." She looked around the bay. "That matters?" Richard said nothing. Jim cleared his throat awkwardly and tapped the data slate. "Well, mechanically speaking, your synchronization rating is the highest I've seen outside military testing programs." "That good?" "That terrifying." A few laughs broke the tension. Jim pointed towards the attachment racks lining the wall. Rows of specialized equipment waited in illuminated storage cradles. Thermal cutters, rescue claws, heavy foam cannons, magnetic lift arrays, portable shield generators, drone deployment pods, high-pressure water accelerators capable of punching through concrete. "This rig can mount over 40 mission configurations," Jim explained. "Urban rescue, wildfire suppression, hazardous material containment, flood response, riot extraction." "Riot extraction?" Richard asked. Jim hesitated. "Crown says firefighters save everyone." Richard studied the equipment racks quietly. Military hardware wearing rescue colors. Same empire, different mission. Atlas 51 spoke softly through the bay speakers. "Lieutenant Hale." Richard looked up. Your biometric stress indicators have decreased 17% since assignment to Station 51. The crew exchanged glances. Atlas continued. "Psychological stabilization appears linked to operational rescue activity." Richard exhaled slowly. The AI was probably right. For years he had only known destruction. Now every life saved felt like balancing a scale he could never fully repay. Captain Vance walked beside him towards the observation deck. "You handled yourself well today." Richard smirked faintly. "You mean I didn't break the expensive equipment?" "That too." They stopped overlooking the mech bay floor. Below them, drones swarmed around the Atlas rig, performing diagnostics, while mechanics moved between towering machines beneath showers of welding sparks. For the first time in a long time, Richard Hale felt something unfamiliar settling into his chest. Not peace, maybe not even redemption, but purpose, and sometimes that was enough. The first thing Richard Hale noticed about Station 51 was that nobody stopped moving. Even at 0300 hours, the station lived like a warship at combat alert. Maintenance drones drifted silently through the apparatus bay, scanning equipment with blue laser grids. Autonomous floor cleaners moved between the massive wheels of Engine 51, while logistics drones unloaded fresh medical supplies from a cargo lift overhead. Above it all, Atlas 51 watched. The station AI existed everywhere at once, in the walls, the lights, the vehicles, the rigs. Nothing inside Station 51 truly slept. Richard stood on the second-level observation walkway, overlooking the mech bay below. Technicians moved around 3 EF-72 fireframes suspended in magnetic maintenance cradles, while weld sparks flashed like tiny lightning storms beneath them. The rigs looked almost peaceful, powered down. That illusion vanished the moment they activated. "Can't sleep either?" Richard glanced sideways. Captain Aaron Rourke leaned against the railing beside him, holding a steaming cup of station coffee. The older man looked exhausted, dark circles beneath sharp eyes, but his posture remained straight as reinforced steel. Richard shrugged. "Still adjusting?" Rourke nodded slowly. "Happens to military transfers." Richard smirked faintly. "You get a lot of those?" "No." Rourke sipped his coffee. "Most soldiers don't come looking for redemption." Richard didn't answer that. Below them, one of the EF-72 rigs powered on for diagnostics. White armoured plating shifted while hydraulic systems hummed to life beneath the shell. The machine's optic sensors glowed pale blue. Rourke watched it quietly. "Funny thing about these rigs," he said. "Most civilians think they're machines built for firefighting. They aren't." "No." Rourke looked towards him. "They're machines built to keep humans alive in places humans shouldn't survive." Richard understood that immediately. Combat armor worked the same way, different mission, same principle. A sharp alarm suddenly echoed through the station. Atlas 51's calm voice followed instantly. "Station 51 respond priority alpha. Residential tower fire with multiple medical casualties. Possible structural instability." Everything changed at once. The station exploded into motion. Firefighters sprinted from dormitories and equipment bays. Medical crews moved toward the response elevators, while drones detached from charging racks overhead like disturbed hornets. Richard followed Captain Rourke towards the apparatus floor. Atlas continued speaking. 43-story residential arcology. Fire suppression systems partially offline. Civilian evacuation incomplete. "Cause?" Rourke asked. "Suspected illegal power tap explosion on sublevel 22. "Of course it is." Heavy 51 roared to life. Beside it, the station's armoured ambulance carrier powered up as medical drones loaded themselves automatically into deployment tubes along the roof. Richard climbed aboard the engine with Ortega and 2 other firefighters, while paramedics loaded trauma gear nearby. One of them caught Richard watching. "You ever work with combat medics?" she asked while locking a medical case into place. "Yeah." She nodded towards the ambulance carrier. "This'll look familiar then." The vehicle doors sealed shut. Sirens erupted. The convoy launched into the sleeping city. Rain streaked across the armoured windshield as Kingsport blurred past in rivers of neon and reflected light. Richard sat in silence, listening to the organised chaos inside the cab. Drone telemetry, building schematics, thermal scans, medical AI predictions. Atlas 51 processed everything simultaneously. Estimated civilians remaining inside structure 73, Atlas stated. Ortega cursed softly. Captain Rourke's voice came over the comms. "Priority remains evacuation. Medical teams establish triage immediately. Richard, you're with me in the rig." "Copy." The tower came into view minutes later. Flames climbed the side of the massive residential structure like glowing veins. Entire sections of the lower floors burned black while terrified civilians crowded emergency balconies above. Emergency drones already swarmed around the skyscraper. Some projected evacuation arrows against smoke-filled walls. Others scanned for heat signatures. One larger drone hovered near a shattered window, deploying compact fire suppressant charges directly into spreading flames. Richard stepped from the engine as heat slammed into him. It felt almost comforting. That disturbed him a little. "Deploy the rigs," Rourke ordered. 2 EF-72 fireframes descended from magnetic transport cradles attached to the support carrier behind Engine 51. The rigs hit the street hard enough to shake pavement. Hydraulics hissed. Blue optics ignited. Richard climbed into one while Captain Rourke entered the second. The cockpit sealed around him. Immediately, his HUD came alive with building schematics and civilian tracking markers supplied by Atlas and the station drones. "Lieutenant Hale synced," the rig AI announced. Outside, paramedics were already establishing triage zones beneath portable shield emitters designed to block falling debris. Richard watched them work while the rig completed synchronization. No panic, no wasted movement. One medic team treated burns while another used autonomous surgical drones to stabilize a civilian crushed beneath debris. Tiny mechanical arms moved with terrifying precision. A child screamed nearby as medics loaded her onto an anti-shock stretcher. The stretcher immediately began administering fluids and monitoring vitals automatically. Richard stared for half a second too long. In the Marines, he had seen systems like that used to preserve soldiers long enough to return them to battle. Here they were used to save civilians. "Richard!" Captain Rourke's voice snapped him back. "Focus! Copy!" The EF-72 moved. The rig smashed through the building's lower security barricades and entered the smoke-filled lobby alongside Rourke's machine. Visibility collapsed instantly. Thermal imaging took over. Orange silhouettes glowed through walls and smoke. "Atlas," Richard said. "Mark trapped civilians." Blue indicators appeared across his visor, 23 life signs above them. The building groaned loudly. "Structural integrity failure progressing," Atlas warned. The rigs advanced deeper inside. Heavy debris blocked the central corridor. Captain Rourke deployed his rig's rescue claws, while Richard activated the magnetic lift array mounted along his forearms. Steel beams rose slowly from the rubble field. Above them, drones flooded through ventilation shafts, carrying compact medical kits and atmospheric sensors. One drone paused beside Richard's cockpit viewport. "Civilian respiratory survival probability decreasing on level 26, Atlas stated through the drone speaker. Richard looked upward. "Then we move faster." The EF-72 sprinted forward. Its armored feet cracked tile flooring while stabilization systems compensated automatically. The building shook violently. Part of the ceiling collapsed ahead. Richard caught the debris instinctively with both arms. The rig strained under the weight. Warning lights flashed across the HUD. Captain Rourke's rig moved beneath the collapse and pulled 2 civilians free from the wreckage. "Nice catch," Rourke muttered over comms. Old instincts returned too easily. Combat reflexes, siege frame muscle memory, except now every movement protected people instead of killing them. That mattered. Richard pushed the debris aside and continued upward through the emergency stairwell. The higher they climbed, the worse conditions became. Heat saturated the walls. Smoke reduced visibility to nearly zero outside thermal overlays. Then Richard heard screaming, level 26. He burst through the stairwell door into chaos. Fire rolled across the ceiling. 3 civilians huddled near shattered windows while an elderly man lay unconscious beside them, and kneeling beside him, a paramedic. Richard recognized her instantly from the ambulance carrier. She looked up as the massive EF-72 entered the room. "Took you long enough," she snapped. Richard almost laughed. "Even here, even now." First responders stayed sarcastic. "What's the situation?" "Patient's coding, smoke inhalation and cardiac arrest." Richard stared. "You came up here alone?" "Drone guided me in before the stairwell collapsed." The medic returned immediately to chest compressions, while 2 medical drones hovered beside her administering oxygen and medication automatically. Richard watched the synchronization between human and machine in stunned silence. The drones handled calculations, dosage monitoring, airway scans. The medic handled judgment, experience, human instinct. Together they moved like one organism. "We need evac now," she shouted. Richard knelt the EF-72 beside the broken wall. "Load them." The rig's rescue platform unfolded from its back compartment, while Captain Rourke's machine stabilized the collapsing floor nearby using anchor spikes. The medic secured the elderly man first, even during collapse, even surrounded by fire. The medics protected the weakest patient first. That stayed with Richard. The civilians loaded aboard the rescue platform while drones projected safe descent routes onto surrounding buildings outside. Richard stepped onto the exterior wall of the tower. Far below, emergency lights painted the streets blue and crimson. The rig began descending. Magnetic stabilization claws dug into the structure with every step. The civilians clung silently to the rescue platform behind him. Halfway down the building, another explosion erupted somewhere below. Flames blasted outward from broken windows. Richard shielded the civilians instinctively with the rig's armoured body. The fire washed over the EF-72 harmlessly, but for one brief second he remembered battlefield dropships burning over colony cities. Bodies, gunfire, screaming. Then the memory vanished beneath another sound. Applause. Crowds below were cheering. Not soldiers, not commanders, civilians, because they were alive. Richard reached the ground level and handed the survivors over to waiting medics. The paramedic from upstairs paused beside him. "You handled the rig pretty well, Marine." "You knew?" She smirked tiredly. "You move like somebody who's been shot at before." Before Richard could answer, another alarm sounded from inside the tower. More trapped civilians. More fire. Captain Rourke's voice came over comms again. "Station 51, move!" Richard turned back toward the burning skyscraper. For years he had believed machines like the EF-72 only existed to wage war. Tonight he watched firefighters, medics, drones, and rigs working together to drag people back from death itself. Maybe the Empire built these machines for control. Maybe the military built them for violence. But here at Station 51, they were saving lives. And Richard Hale was beginning to understand that salvation could be its own kind of battle. If you enjoyed this chapter of Ashfall Continuum, please like, subscribe, and join us for future missions with Station 51. New chapters, mech action, firefighting operations, and sci-fi stories are on the way. Until next time, the smoke had settled into a low, grey haze by the time Captain Aaron Rourke finally removed his helmet. Not cleared, not gone. Just hanging there like the city itself refused to let the dead leave. The remains of the apartment block still crackled behind the containment drones. Emergency floodlights painted the wet streets in alternating white and amber while CES personnel moved through the wreckage with exhausted precision. 2 civilians dead. Minor fire by megacity standards. Still counted the same. Rourke stood beside Heavy 51, one armoured glove resting against the scarred hull of the massive rescue vehicle. Rainwater hissed against the warm plating. Above him, Station 51's aerial drones circled lazily, their searchlights cutting through smoke and drizzle. Nearby, Richard Hale remained inside the EF-72 fireframe. The exoframe knelt near the collapsed entrance like some wounded mechanical giant. Hydraulic systems softly clicked as the rig shifted its weight. Richard had not powered down yet. Rourke understood why. The rookie was taking the deaths personally. Again. "Extraction teams are clear," Lieutenant Vega reported over local comms. "Coroner drones inbound." Rourke nodded once. "Copy." His eyes drifted back toward Richard's rig. The fireframe's helmet remained tilted downward toward the blackened remains of the structure. Still staring, Rourke exhaled slowly. "That kid's gonna kill himself trying to save everybody." Before Vega could answer, a sharp tone sounded across the perimeter net. Unauthorized convoy approaching. Several heads turned simultaneously. At the far end of the street, a line of matte black armoured vehicles rolled silently through the rain. Not civilian luxury, government luxury, heavy, elegant, dangerous. Blue-white running lights reflected across puddles as the convoy ignored the outer traffic barriers entirely and came to a stop just outside the secured zone. Rourke immediately recognized the insignia embossed into the lead vehicle's side panels, the crown. Every firefighter nearby straightened instinctively. Vehicle doors opened in perfect sequence. Royal Marines emerged first, 6 of them. Tall figures in dark ceremonial combat uniforms beneath weather capes, rifles magnetically locked to chest plates. Their movements were calm and disciplined in the unsettling way only elite soldiers moved. Not police, not security, war fighters. Then another figure stepped out, Prince Alistair Rowan. Even dressed casually, he looked impossible to mistake for anything except royalty. His dark coat carried subtle military tailoring, silver piping running along the shoulders and cuffs. No medals, no unnecessary ornamentation. Everything about him projected controlled authority instead of theatrical politics. He moved like a man fully aware that nations shifted when he spoke. Behind him came another man in a charcoal intelligence overcoat, no insignia, which somehow made him worse. Rourke felt the mood across the scene change instantly. Not fear, pressure, the kind that arrived before history did. One of the Royal Marines approached first. "Captain Aaron Rourke." "That's me." The Marine gave a respectful nod. "His Highness wished to thank your crews personally." Rourke blinked once. That was unusual, very unusual. The prince himself walked forward before Rourke could respond. Up close, Alistair Rowan looked younger than media broadcasts suggested. Early 30s, perhaps. But his eyes ruined the illusion immediately. Old eyes, measured eyes, the eyes of someone trained from childhood to command men into gunfire. "Captain," the prince said warmly, extending a gloved hand, "you have my gratitude." Rourke shook it carefully. "Just doing our job, sir." "And doing it well." The prince glanced toward the ruined structure. 2 fatalities could have been 20. His voice carried calm certainty rather than comfort. He spoke like a commander reviewing battlefield losses. Rourke noticed the intelligence officer behind him scanning the scene carefully. Not the fire, not the damage. The personnel. The officer's attention stopped briefly on Richard's exoframe. Stayed there. Interesting. The prince followed the gaze naturally. "So that is the new EF-72 platform?" Rourke nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir. And the operator?" "Probationary transfer, Richard Hale." For the first time, the prince's expression shifted slightly. Recognition. Tiny. Controlled. But there. The intelligence officer and one of the Royal Marines exchanged a brief glance so subtle most people would have missed it entirely. Rourke did not. Interesting. Very interesting. The prince began walking toward the kneeling exoframe. The Marines allowed it without hesitation, which meant one thing. They were not worried about his safety, because they already knew exactly who Richard Hale was. The smoke still lingered over the warehouse district hours after the main fire had been contained. Heavy 51 remained parked in the middle of the ruined industrial sector like a steel fortress surrounded by ash and flashing emergency lights. Firefighters moved across piles of debris while drones swept methodically overhead, their search beams cutting through drifting smoke. Hydraulic rigs groaned in the distance as exoframes lifted collapsed sections of concrete for investigators below. Captain Aaron Rourke had already been recalled to headquarters nearly 40 minutes earlier. Now his command interceptor sped through the crowded arteries of Crown City, while rain streaked across the windshield and neon reflections slid over the armoured hood. He hated leaving an active scene, especially this one. The image of Crown Prince Alistair Rowan standing beside Heavy 51 kept replaying in his head. Royals did not casually visit disaster sites, not personally, not without layers of security and political theatre surrounding them. This had felt different, too quiet, too direct. The interceptor finally descended into the lower transit bay of CES headquarters. Unlike the polished executive levels above, the lower sections of headquarters still felt like a real fire command center. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee, hydraulic fluid, and wet turnout gear. Dispatchers moved between glowing tactical boards while exhausted firefighters sat along briefing benches reviewing incident footage or waiting for reassignment. Emergency alerts echoed periodically across the massive operations floor as giant holoscreens tracked fires, medical emergencies, riots, infrastructure failures, and storm activity across the megacity. Here CES still felt human, busy, loud, alive. Rourke stepped out of the interceptor and several personnel immediately noticed him. Word had already spread. A pair of engine captains glanced up from a situation board. "That's him," one muttered quietly. "The prince talked to Station 51 directly?" Apparently. Rourke ignored them and continued deeper into the building. As he crossed the operations level, massive transparent displays showed live drone feeds from across the city. One section tracked firefighting deployments. Another monitored civil unrest spreading through outer sectors. Medical casualty numbers rolled steadily upward in one corner of the display before vanishing behind classified overlays. Too much activity for a normal night. A young administrative officer met him near the central elevator bank. "This way, Captain." Rourke nodded once. The elevator doors closed behind them, and the headquarters he recognized slowly disappeared. The higher the elevator climbed, the quieter everything became. The smell of smoke vanished first, then the noise. By the time they reached the executive levels, the building no longer resembled a fire department at all. The corridors were spotless white and black glass. Soft lighting reflected across polished floors without a single scuff mark visible anywhere. Silent security drones floated near the ceilings, while corporate aides walked calmly between offices carrying data slates instead of medical kits or breathing masks. Nobody hurried here, nobody looked tired. The upper floors felt more like the headquarters of a mega-corporation than the command center of Crown Emergency Services. Rourke had always hated that. The administrative officer stopped beside a pair of towering black doors. Chief Administrator Sarin is waiting. The doors slid open. A massive conference chamber overlooked the endless skyline of Crown City beyond reinforced glass walls. Lightning flickered silently in distant storm clouds while holographic tactical displays hovered above a long obsidian table. Chief Administrator Malik Sarin stood near the window with his hands folded behind his back. Tall, thin, dark-skinned. His uniform looked perfectly pressed despite the late hour, and sharp grey streaks cut through his close-cropped hair. He looked less like a firefighter and more like a senior government minister. Several administrators sat around the chamber reviewing reports from the warehouse incident. Most barely glanced up as Rourke entered. Sarin turned towards him slowly. "Captain Rourke." "Chief." Sarin gestured towards the chair across from the table. "Sit down." Rourke obeyed. For several seconds the room remained silent except for distant thunder outside. Then Sarin activated the holo display. The image of Crown Prince Alistair Rowan appeared instantly beside Station 51 personnel at the fire scene. Several administrators shifted uncomfortably. Rourke resisted the urge to sigh. Sarin spoke carefully. "Captain, would you care to explain why the heir to the crown was operating inside an unsecured industrial disaster zone alongside your personnel?" "I can't explain the prince's decision, sir," Rourke answered evenly. "He arrived unexpectedly." One administrator leaned forward slightly. Atlas 51 confirmed the Crown Prince initiated contact personally. At the mention of the station AI, Sarin's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes," the chief said quietly. "Atlas provided a very thorough report." That got Rourke's attention. Sarin began slowly pacing around the table. "Do you understand how uncommon direct royal interaction with active CES crews actually is, Captain?" "Yes, sir." "The royal family does not make surprise appearances at emergency scenes." Sarin stopped briefly beside the skyline window. "Especially after Sector 12. The room grew noticeably quieter. Nobody elaborated, nobody needed to. Sector 12 remained one of the Empire's most heavily classified disasters. Sarin finally turned back towards him. "And now we are informed that both you and firefighter Richard Hale held private conversations with the Crown Prince." Rourke remained silent. The chief studied him for a long moment before his tone softened slightly. "I'm not accusing you of misconduct, Captain. Station 51 has one of the strongest operational records in the entire Crown Emergency Service." He leaned forward slightly against the table. "But you need to understand something carefully." Lightning flashed beyond the glass walls behind him. "When the Crown suddenly starts taking interest in firefighters," he paused, "it usually means the Continuum believes trouble is coming." Back at the fire scene, Richard Hale stood beside heavy drone carrier 51, staring upward as massive support drones moved through the smoke overhead. For the first time since the explosion, his hands had finally stopped shaking. The conversation with Prince Rowan still replayed in his mind. "You did your duty." Richard was not sure whether those words comforted him or terrified him. Atlas 51's voice echoed softly from nearby speakers mounted on the mobile command platform. "Stress indicators reduced by 22%, Mr. Hale. Improvement acknowledged." Richard glanced upward. "You monitor everybody that closely?" "Only when necessary." A nearby officer laughed quietly. Lieutenant Jace Torrin stepped down from the mobile command vehicle carrying a data slate under one arm. Unlike most firefighters on scene, Torrin wore the grey tactical uniform of CES Drone Operations Command. "You should see Atlas during full-scale disasters," Torrin said. "The AI practically tracks our heartbeats." "I do track your heartbeats, Lieutenant." "See," Torrin grinned. Richard managed a small laugh. Torrin motioned towards the massive command vehicle behind them. "You want the tour?" Richard hesitated. "I'm probably not supposed to." "Prince already spoke to you. Trust me, nobody's worried about protocol anymore." The rear section of Heavy 51 unfolded as they approached, armoured panels separating to reveal an entire mobile coordination centre hidden inside the vehicle. Richard stopped in disbelief. Rows of holographic displays floated in mid-air while drone telemetry streamed across transparent screens. Tactical maps showed the entire district in real time, including firefighter positions, medical triage zones, utility failures, and atmospheric contamination readings. Above the command base ceiling, dozens of drone feeds operated simultaneously. Search drones, medical drones, suppression drones, heavy lift drones. Richard stared upward as one massive quad-rotor unit carried a steel beam away from the collapsed structure. "You run all this from one truck?" Jace nodded. "Heavy 51 is basically a portable war room." "Emergency coordination platform," Atlas corrected immediately. "Right, portable emergency coordination war room." Richard shook his head slowly. "This is more advanced than military systems I've seen." Torin and Atlas both went silent for half a second. That silence told Richard more than either intended. Finally, Atlas spoke. "Modern emergencies increasingly overlap with planetary security concerns." Richard looked carefully between the drone feeds. "And what exactly qualifies as a planetary security concern these days?" Neither answered immediately. One of the monitors suddenly shifted to a live strategic overlay of the city. Multiple red markers briefly flashed across distant sectors before disappearing, Richard noticed. "So that's not normal?" Jace Torin folded his arms. "No," he admitted quietly, "it's really not." Far above the city, the royal transports glided silently through protected area known as King's District 1. Inside the dimly lit cabin, Crown Prince Alistair Rowan stood beside the observation window, watching the megacity lights stretch endlessly outside the window. Across from him sat Director Lucien Carter, head of the Crown Intelligence Directorate. Vale was older than the prince by at least 20 years, though the sharpness in his pale eyes made him seem far younger. His uniform carried no decorations beyond a small silver crown insignia near the collar. That alone marked him as dangerous. "The reports from Sector 9 concern me," Carter said quietly. Alistair nodded once. "They concern me as well." Vale activated a classified holo-display between them. Fragments of surveillance footage flickered into view. Civil unrest, supply riots, unidentified armed groups moving through outer sectors, system outages, disappearing transports. Then came images from the warehouse fire. Heavy 51, station personnel, Richard Hale, Aaron Rourke. "The instability is spreading faster than projected," Carter said. "Several outer colonial systems have already stopped responding to central directives." Alistair crossed his arms. "And the king still believes tighter control will solve it." Carter remained silent. That silence itself was an answer. The prince stared back out across the city. "People trust CES," he said eventually, "more than the military, more than intelligence, more than the government." "Because firefighters arrive to save people," Vale replied, "not control them." Alistair nodded slowly. "That may become very important soon." Carter studied the prince carefully. "You believe conflict is unavoidable." "I believe," Alistair said quietly, "that something is already moving beneath the surface of the Continuum." The transport continued forward through the storm-clouded streets far below. Station 51's drones still moved through smoke and fire, while the city carried on, unaware of the shadows slowly gathering around the crown itself. Pale morning sunlight filtered through the armoured glass walls of the massive complex. Part firehouse, part command bunker, part disaster response fortress, hummed with controlled life. Crews moved through the lower apparatus bays carrying coffee mugs and gear bags. Maintenance drones rolled along polished concrete floors. Above them, suspended from overhead rails, heavy firefighting drones sat dormant in their charging racks like mechanical predators waiting for war. Today, for once, there was no war. At least not yet. Today was ceremony day. The auditorium level of headquarters was the emergency coordination hall. Now banners of Crown Emergency Services hung from the steel walls beside the crest of Kingsport. Rows of firefighters, medics, drone operators, and exo-frame crews filled the chamber. Richard Hale stood in dress uniform beside 6 other probationary firefighters. 1 year. 1 year since he had walked into Station 51 as an outsider. 1 year since the Royal Marine veteran had traded combat armour for turnout gear. Captain Aaron Rourke stood near the front row with his arms crossed, watching silently beneath the brim of his black CES cap. Beside him sat several senior officers and battalion chiefs. Jace Torin leaned against the back wall near the drone operations crews, grinning like he already knew Richard hated ceremonies. "Try not to look so terrified," Jace muttered. Richard exhaled slowly. "I'd rather fight a mechanized insurgent platoon." That can probably be arranged later." Richard smirked despite himself. The room settled as Battalion Chief Eleanor Ward stepped onto the stage. Ward was built like old steel, grey-haired, sharp-eyed, and carrying the kind of command presence that silenced a room without effort. She opened a data tablet. "Today," she began, "we recognize the probationary firefighters of the 214th Crown Emergency Services Academy cohort, now completing their first operational year within Kingsport Division." Applause echoed through the hall. Ward's eyes scanned the room. 1 year in CES means something. It means you survived the calls no one prepares you for, the dead children, the tower collapses, the industrial fires, the medical extractions, the days where you question whether you can keep going. The room grew quiet. And despite all of it, you stayed. She looked towards Richard. Firefighter Richard Hale. Richard stepped forward, a hollow display activated behind him, projecting operational footage from the last year. Fire scenes, medical rescues, drone feeds, exoframe deployments. Ward continued. Former Royal Marine Sergeant Richard Hale entered Crown Emergency Services with prior combat commendations and extensive mechanised warfare experience. Images flashed behind him of a younger Hale in Marine combat armour. During his probationary year, Firefighter Hale completed Advanced Urban Rescue Certification, Hazardous Environment Qualification, and Class 3 Exoframe Integration Training. More footage appeared. Richard operating an EF-72 fireframe inside a burning maglev tunnel. Richard carrying civilians through floodwaters. Richard shielding medics during a chemical plant explosion. Firefighter Hale has participated in 112 emergency responses, 26 high-risk structural fires, 11 confirmed life-saving rescues. Ward paused. He additionally became one of the youngest certified heavy exoframe operators in Kingsport Division history. That earned genuine applause. Even Richard looked uncomfortable with the attention. Ward smiled faintly. Reports from commanding officers consistently describe Firefighter Hale with the same phrase. She looked up from the tablet. He moves toward the danger before being ordered. Several firefighters nodded knowingly. Captain Rourke's expression remained stoic, though there was unmistakable pride in his eyes. Ward stepped closer. The drive of a Royal Marine adapted to the purpose of Crown Emergency Services. She extended the silver service pin. "Congratulations, Firefighter Hale. Probationary status removed." The room erupted into applause. Richard accepted the pin. For just a moment he thought about how different this felt from military commendations. No medals for killing, no honours for destruction, only for saving people. That mattered more than he expected. 2 hours later, the atmosphere inside Station 51 had completely changed. Music echoed through the recreation hall while crews crowded around tables stacked with food containers and drink dispensers. Someone had convinced one of the maintenance drones to wear a party hat. Captain Rourke pretended not to notice. Richard sat with Jace Torrin and several firefighters from Rescue Squad 3, while off-duty crews laughed nearby. "You know," Jace said between bites of terrible station cake, "you officially outrank probationary coffee duty now." Richard nodded seriously. "A proud day." "Don't get excited," another firefighter said. "You still clean drone ash filters." "Tragic," Jace raised a drink. "To Richard Hale, former Royal Marine, current exoframe lunatic." Glasses lifted around the table. "To Richard!" Richard shook his head with a grin. Across the hall, Atlas 51's holographic avatar flickered above the central tactical projector. The AI normally remained muted during social events. Tonight it quietly monitored station systems, while crews relaxed. Captain Rourke stood near the far wall speaking with Battalion Chief Ward. Neither of them were drinking. Neither of them looked relaxed. Rourke's mind remained fixed on the royal visit from months earlier, on Prince Rowan's warning. CES support would soon be needed. He still did not know exactly what that meant. Then every light in the recreation hall shifted crimson. The music stopped instantly. Conversations died. Atlas 51's voice filled the station. "Priority alert!" Every firefighter froze. A massive tactical display exploded across the wall screens. Kingsport. 3 separate flashing red zones appeared across the city. Confirmed mass casualty events. Silence. Then another voice transmission cut through the room, police channels screaming with overlapping gunfire. Richard immediately recognized automatic weapons fire. Not random, organized. Atlas 51 continued. Event 1. Vehicle-borne explosive attack at Kingsport Transit Terminal. New images appeared. Fire, smoke, collapsed maglev infrastructure, people running. Event 2. Armed assault and fires reported at South Harbour Fuel Processing District. More images. Industrial tanks burning. Security forces exchanging fire. Event 3. Coordinated attack underway at Crown Financial Exchange Tower. Gunfire echoed over live police feeds. Civilians screaming. Jace stared at the tactical display. "This isn't random." "No," Richard said quietly. "It's war." Atlas 51's tone remained calm. Kingsport Police and Royal Military Forces are engaged with hostile elements at all 3 locations. A beat passed, then multiple fires spreading uncontrolled. The station transformed instantly. Party atmosphere vanished like it had never existed. Firefighters moved with terrifying speed. Tables overturned as crews grabbed gear. Drone operators sprinted toward command and control. Exoframe crews ran for deployment elevators. Captain Rourke's voice thundered across the hall. "All units move!" Richard was already pulling on his turnout coat. Jace slammed a tactical headset over his ears while running beside him. "I'm getting drone feeds now. Holy hell!" The displays updated again. More explosions, more fires, more casualties. Atlas 51 spoke across every level of headquarters simultaneously. Citywide CES mobilization authorized. Deep within the station, warning klaxons began to howl. Massive armored bay doors started opening, one after another, like a fortress awakening. Below the headquarters tower, engines roared to life. Heavy pump trucks, rescue carriers, mobile medical units, autonomous suppression rigs, combat-rated evacuation transports, drone launch rails activated overhead, rows of aerial response drones lifted into the air. Farther below, inside reinforced deployment hangars, EF-72 fireframes powered on in synchronized sequence, steel giants awakening beneath floodlights. Richard reached the exoframe prep bay alongside his crew. Technicians were already moving. "Frame 7 loaded. Thermal systems green. Hydraulics online." Jace's voice crackled over comms. "Richard, South Harbour's becoming a nightmare. Fuel fires spreading fast." Richard climbed toward the waiting fireframe. Above them all, Atlas 51's holographic form appeared across the command screens. Calm, cold, precise. The AI's voice echoed through every corridor of Station 51. "All CES units, deploy!" Outside headquarters, the streets of Kingsport filled with sirens. Columns of fire apparatus thundered into the night. Drones streaked overhead. Exoframes marched beside armored rescue vehicles. And somewhere beyond the burning skyline, the real attack had only just begun. Royal Marine Exoframe Proving Grounds. Lieutenant Weston Howard didn't walk the line. He burst through it. The world outside the cockpit was a wash of salt haze and churned sand, pounding somewhere beyond the training range berms. But inside the HAE-90 Heavy Assault Exoframe, everything narrowed into a tight, humming universe of steel, data, and controlled violence. Howard flexed his right hand. The rig's massive arm followed, half a second of delay smoothed out by the Commando Direct Link until it felt like his own muscle, just heavier, slower, powerful in a way flesh never could be. "Link integrity at 98%, the AI Odin said calmly in his ear. "Good morning, Lieutenant." Howard smirked. "Good morning, dear heart. I am programmed to encourage confidence." "Confidence isn't the problem," he muttered. "It's restraint." He rolled his shoulders. The exoframe responded with a low, mechanical growl, servos tightening, armor plates shifting over each other with a deep, grinding weight. 18 tons settling into readiness. God, he loved that sound. Ahead, the training range lit up, pop-up targets rising from reinforced pits, concrete silhouettes, mock armor hulks, drone tracks sliding into motion. "Range hot," came the distant voice over comms. "All units, live fire authorized. Howard, you're first through." I hoped you would say that. Howard leaned forward slightly, instinct more than necessity. "Weapons live." "Confirmed," Odin replied. M920 autocannon spooling. The right arm woke up. A rising whine built into a mechanical scream as the rotary barrels began to spin. The vibration came through the entire frame, through the seat, the harness, his spine. Not uncomfortable, just present. "Gods, that never gets old," Howard said. "It is statistically likely to remain consistent," Odin answered. "Yeah, you're hilarious." He stepped forward. Each footfall hit like a dropped engine block. Thud, 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 sand and gravel compressing under reinforced mass. Even throttled down for training, a heavy assault frame didn't move quietly. It announced itself. "Speed check," he said. "Current velocity, 22 kilometers per hour. You may increase safely." Howard grinned. "Let's stretch her legs." He pushed. The response was immediate, power flooding into the myoma bundles, the mech leaning into motion. The ground blurred just a little more. The impacts came faster. Thud, 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 thud. 35 kilometers per hour, the AI noted. Recommend stabilization for firing. Howard didn't slow. "Target's up," he said instead. "Acquiring." The world shifted, overlay grids snapping into place across his vision. Red boxes, distance markers, wind compensation, predictive lines dancing like ghosts of bullets yet to be fired. "Engage!" He squeezed the trigger. The autocannon didn't fire. It roared, a continuous thunderous stream, brrrrt, that shook the entire frame as 30mm rounds tore across the range. The recoil hammered back, but the heavy rig absorbed it. Stabilizers digging in, micro-adjustments firing faster than thought. Targets didn't fall. They disintegrated. Concrete shattered into dust. Steel silhouettes ripped apart in sprays of sparks and fragments. The sound was overwhelming, like standing inside a storm made of metal. Howard laughed. He couldn't help it. "Volume levels exceeding safe auditory thresholds," the AI said. "I'm a tank," he shot back. "I'll live." "Correction, you are a heavy assault exo-frame." "Same difference." He released the trigger. The sudden silence rang in his ears, replaced by the ticking whine of cooling metal. "Missiles," he said. "SRM-14 rack ready. Targets?" Howard glanced at the far ridge, armored hulks rolling into view. "There! Locking! Locking! Lock confirmed!" He exhaled slowly. "Fire!" The shoulder pod kicked, a sharp, controlled series of thuds as micromissiles streaked out in rapid succession. Trails of smoke cut across the sky, arcing, then impact. A chain of explosions rolled across the ridge. Fireballs punched upward, followed by delayed shockwaves that hit the rig like distant thunder. Howard watched the aftermath, breathing steady. "Effective," Odin said. "Yeah," he replied quietly. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then, "Tell me something," Howard said. "You ever think about what this is really for?" A pause, just long enough to feel intentional. "I'm aware this is a training exercise," Odin answered. "That's not what I asked." Another pause. "My purpose is to assist you in mission success," it said finally. "Your purpose and the mission parameters defines mine." Howard leaned back slightly in the harness, watching smoke drift across the range. "Richard used to say something like that," he murmured. "Richard Hale," the AI said immediately. "Service record cross-referenced. Influence noted." Howard smiled faintly. "Yeah, him. We did recruit training together and served together several times." A new set of targets began to rise. The range wasn't done with him yet. Howard rolled his shoulders again, feeling the weight, the power, the machine wrapping around him like a second body. "All right," he said. "Let's go again." The autocannon began to spin up. After this, a little time in the city, Crown Emergency Services Fire Station 51. The celebration lights inside the station were still glowing when the first response convoys tore out of the bays. Music still echoed faintly through the station halls. Half-finished drinks sat abandoned on tables. The 1 year of service banners still hung from the ceiling as the city descended into chaos. Outside, Kingsport burned. Kingsport Transit Terminal Heavy 51 thundered through downtown traffic with sirens screaming. The massive rescue rig forced civilian vehicles aside as emergency drones swarmed overhead, projecting evacuation routes onto nearby buildings using data sent by Atlas 51. Inside the command section, Jace Torrin sat locked into the drone control cradle, hands moving across holographic displays, while Atlas 51 flooded the cabin with updated live steams. "Confirmed vehicle detonation at Kingsport Transit Terminal," Atlas announced calmly. "Secondary armed insurgent presence detected." Captain Aaron Rourke stood behind the forward command console, armoured gloves gripping the rail hard enough to creak metal. "How bad?" Jace's face tightened as feeds populated the screens. "Bad. Very bad. The terminal looked like a war zone. Burning buses, collapsed transit tunnels, bodies. Smoke rolled through the shattered structure while civilians fled in every direction, and moving through the chaos, armed men." Multiple hostiles, Jace said. Automatic weapons, military-grade armor. Then another warning appeared. Jace froze. Captain! Rourke looked over. The drone feed zoomed in on something emerging from the smoke. Huge, industrial, improvised armor plates welded across its body. Hydraulic arms reinforced with steel slabs. Rotary gun mounted to one side. Atlas, do you have a designation? Rourke asked. The AI paused a fraction longer than normal. Unregistered hostile mechanized platform, Atlas replied. Field designation, ugly. The thing stepped over burning vehicles like toys and opened fire. South Harbor Fuel District. The Harbor District was an inferno. Fuel storage tanks burned against the night sky while black smoke climbed thousands of feet into the air. Richard Hale moved through the chaos inside his EF-72 fireframe, the massive exo-rig stomping across scorched concrete. Behind him, backup pumper trucks established water supply lines, while two additional fireframes advanced through the industrial maze. Tank pressure stabilizing, one firefighter reported. Foam saturation holding, another answered. Compared to the terminal attack, this seemed manageable, dangerous but manageable. Richard directed his suppression cannons toward a ruptured transfer pipe, flooding the area with chemical foam. Good work, he said over comms. Keep the heat away from Tank 4. Then came the call. Hail! A firefighter shouted from across the platform. Valve controls are jammed. Richard turned. A massive emergency cutoff valve near one of the transfer manifolds was stuck. If it failed, the entire section could erupt. Richard swore quietly. My rig's too large for the access platform, he said. Without hesitation, he disengaged from the fireframe. The armored cockpit hissed open. Richard climbed down into the heat and smoke wearing only his firefighting armor. The valve wheel was massive. 3 firefighters strained against it, barely moving it. Richard grabbed the wheel beside them. On 3! The metal screamed as they forced it around inch by inch. 1! The first gunshot cracked through the smoke. The firefighter beside Richard dropped instantly. More shots followed. Insurgents burst from behind the storage tanks. Small force. Fast. Close. Richard keyed the command channel. All units, he said grimly. We're moving. Crown Financial Exchange, downtown Kingsport, echoed with gunfire. The towering Crown Financial Exchange building burned from multiple floors, while military forces exchanged fire with entrenched insurgents. Battalion Chief Eleanor Ward crouched behind an overturned armoured transport beside members of Station 3. Chunks of concrete exploded around them from incoming rounds. A Royal Marine squad held the line nearby. At their centre stood Royal Marine Weston Howard, tall, broad-shouldered, combat armour blackened with soot and dust. Weston fired controlled bursts down the avenue before ducking behind cover beside Ward. They've got elevated positions on the East Tower, he said. Ward wiped blood from her cheek. We're trying to evacuate civilians from the lower floors. Another explosion rocked the intersection. Weston looked toward the smoke. We're losing the street. Transit terminal. Heavy 51 slammed through barricades into hell itself. The Ugly stood in the center of the terminal concourse like some mechanical beast dragged out of a scrapyard nightmare. Its armor was mismatched industrial plating. Its hydraulic limbs dripped oil and blood. Civilian vehicles burned around it while insurgents advanced behind the machine, using it as moving cover. Medic 51 was already taking fire. Rourke's voice thundered over comms. Deploy drones! Establish casualty corridor! Jace launched support drones into the smoke, while Atlas 51 processed targets faster than humanly possible. The Ugly turned towards Heavy 51. Its rotary guns spun. Captain, Jace warned. Too late. The terminal exploded in sparks and shattered concrete as the machine opened fire. Heavy 51 rocked violently. Warning alarms screamed through the cabin. Outside, firefighters and medics dragged civilians through gunfire while insurgents closed in from multiple directions. Rourke looked at the battlefield and understood immediately. They were outmatched. Then Atlas spoke. Additional Crown Emergency Services units inbound. The Run Richard Hale's fireframe charged through the streets of Kingsport at full speed. The 2 other EF-72s thundered beside him. Cars swerved out of the way. Pedestrians fled sidewalks. The rigs moved like charging steel giants beneath the burning skyline. Atlas guided them through collapsing traffic grids. Recommended route, uploaded. Richard barely heard it. Ahead, smoke from the terminal climbed into the night, and beneath it, gunfire. The ugly Richard arrived just as the ugly tore through a rescue vehicle. The mechanized brute smashed the transport onto its side like crumpled paper. Screams echoed from inside. "Move!" Richard roared. The fireframes opened suppression streams first, not water, impact foam. The chemical blast staggered the ugly sideways. Its gun turned instantly toward Richard. The first round slammed into his fireframe hard enough to shake his teeth. Armor warning screamed. The other fireframes engaged insurgents around the plaza while Richard charged directly at the monster. The ugly swung a hydraulic arm. Richard barely blocked it. The impact sounded like two freight trains colliding. Metal shrieked. Hydraulic lines burst. The ugly smashed him backward through a transit support pillar. Concrete exploded around the rig. Richard ripped one of his suppression cannons free and swung it like a club. The steel tube crushed into the ugly's weapon mount. The rotary gun ripped loose in a shower of sparks, but the machine kept coming. The ugly slammed into Richard's fireframe chest first. Hydraulics screamed. Warning lights flooded the cockpit. Richard roared and drove the broken suppression cannon through the machine's armored faceplate. The ugly staggered, then grabbed Richard's rig with both arms. Metal began bending inward. Richard could hear structural members snapping around him. The cockpit frame started collapsing. "Richard!" Jace shouted through comms. Richard looked outside, saw twisted steel debris beside the terminal, a fallen structural beam. He disengaged the ruined suppression cannon, grabbed the beam with both hydraulic hands, and swung. The first hit crushed into the ugly's shoulder, the second shattered armor plating, the third tore open the cockpit section, and the fourth drove completely through the machine. Steel punched into the pilot compartment with horrific force. The ugly staggered backward, still moving, still trying to fight. Richard screamed and swung again. He had done this before. Again. Each impact crushed more metal. Hydraulic fluid sprayed like blood. The pilot inside disappeared beneath mangled steel and shattered armor. Finally, the ugly collapsed, dead. The massive wreck crashed into the terminal floor with enough force to shake the entire structure. Silence followed. Then the screams started again. Fires still burned. Civilians still cried for help. Bodies still covered the station floor. Kingsport had survived, but it had been wounded, badly. Richard stood in the ruined plaza inside his battered fireframe while emergency sirens echoed across the city. Atlas 51 finally spoke softly over the comm network. "All hostile forces are retreating." They were not soldiers, only firefighters, techs and medical personnel. Nobody cheered, because everyone could already see the cost.